Our last speaker on today's panel is Dr. Maysoun Freij, who is a senior evaluator in the Center for Evaluation at the New York Academy of Medicine. Dr. Freij is an anthropologist and has worked in the field of public health for a number of years. She holds a master's in public health and a PhD in cultural anthropology from Emory University. And her dissertation research was entitled The Lighter Side of Evil, Arab American Artists in New York, and was based on a number of years of ethnographic research in the arts and organizers of Arab descent in post-9/11 New York. The title of her talk today is Occupying Space in the Big Apple.
Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you all for being here. And thank you so much for the invitation to this conference, particularly because it allows me to keep a foot in the Arab American studies world. As you can tell, I have sort of two careers. So you're indulging my Gemini-ness of being able to keep up with both. So I really appreciate that. So the talk today could be subtitled Identity Production Through Real Estate, I think. I'm not actually going to be talking about the artwork. Art, as I learned through my dissertation, is a lot of work, involves a lot of collective labor, and involves a lot of other elements besides the actual art and the talent of the producers of art. So I'm actually going to be focusing more on the spatial configurations of the art productions, as well as the messaging that went along with the promotion of Arab American arts. So this paper is based on my ethnographic work of Arab American artists and arts organizers working in New York from 2003 to 2006. During this time period, a vibrant art scene emerged in New York aimed at increasing the exposure of Arab American artists to the general arts and entertainment industries of New York. This scene drew a wide array of Arab American filmmakers, comedians, actors, musicians, playwrights, poets, and visual artists into a network of producers and consumers of creative products aimed at their respective commercial art markets, but also infused with ethnically identifiable content. Though geographically dispersed throughout metropolitan New York, this community thrived off internet listservs and events in venues throughout Manhattan. So basically, my fieldwork, as I said, was 2003-2006, involved observations of productions of artistic events, including also volunteering for a lot of the productions of them, analysis of performances and exhibits, interviews with artists and arts organizers, and also joined this Arab New York listserv. This was pre-Facebook, if you can believe it. It was only 2003 to 2006, but regardless, there was no Facebook then. So in this paper, I explore how Arab Americans use space to market their relative positions within American society, and the ways they negotiate their visibility among Arabs and non-Arab Americans. I describe how organizers create and manage spaces to nurture and promote artists of Arab descent, even as they try to appeal to an ever-imagined Arab American audience. I also describe the contest over representation of Arab identity that takes place within mainstream marketplace of cultural production in New York. So just really quickly, like who were the people I was with? They were mixed. It was pan-Arab. So they were mostly actually Palestinian, some Lebanese, Egyptians, one Iraqi, one Syrian. Only 7 were native Arab speakers, and 5 of those were actually males. They were mostly women. More than half of them were second generation, and then among the half that remained, they were 1.5, so they came very young. They were mostly Christian, though there were some Muslims, and 2 were mixed. They were mostly in their 30s. So this is like the Generation Xers, you know, born in 1965, 1976, supposedly where our professions and our identity are very important to our identities. And this is significant, and will come up again later. Most were single, actually heterosexual, some were not. 5 were married, but all to non-Arabs. 13 had received masters in fine arts, and 11 were earned their primary income from the arts. So they're pretty educated, bougie bunch of people, actually. So this was the context in which I worked in. So I'm actually going to put them more in the context, I think, of America than really the Arab world, because I think a lot of their art production really was using American idioms, American styles, more in a genre of the American international art market than you would say like Taroth or something traditional or something folkloric in any way. And so I really want to put them into the context of the art world in which they operate in. Basically, whether through their social lives or their professional artistic endeavors, Arab Americans in the study occupied spaces and shared habits with other artists and performers of their generation. They were able to leverage their knowledge of the cultural landscape of New York City towards promoting artistic work that emphasized their Arab ethnic identity. In turn, they were reciprocally recruited by the New York's culture industry to provide authenticity to mainstream productions that comment on U.S. involvement in the Middle East. New York is popularly recognized as the cultural capital of the United States and possibly of the world. The growth of the New York cultural industry from World War II till today has been tremendous and reflects their overall importance of aesthetic and creative economies in the post-industrial world and the role in maintaining urban environments as spaces for both middle-class society and capitalist investment. Significantly, the transformation of the art market post-World War II enabled artists to earn a living as artists and also to make art and their lifestyles of artists palatable to the middle class. In How New York Stole the Idea of Modern Art, Serge Gubeau describes the shift of modern art production from Paris to New York during and after World War II, and how this shift was contingent upon the expansion of the capitalist and geopolitical interests of the United States. Whereas art throughout the Great Depression whereas artists throughout the Great Depression engaged in a recognized profession and produced works of socialist realism for the laboring masses, artists post-World War II were celebrated for their independence and freedom of expression, and some were highly rewarded financially. This corresponded to Cold War tactics that associated artistic freedom with democracy, and the government, in due turn, shifted its focus from artist subsidies through the WPA, or the Works Progress Administration, to stimulating mass consumption of artwork on the private art market. Political art, often produced within a Marxist framework, became unfashionable and publicly challenged by McCarthy anti-communist entities such as the House Un-American Activities Committee. So jumping ahead to 2000, New York City ranked second to Disneyland as a tourist destination for Americans. And I believe the destruction of the World Trade Center on September 11, 2001, only strengthened America's attachment to New York as a quintessentially modern American city. The tragedy also provided renewed impetus for developers to enlist the arts and culture as a strategy for revitalization. And one example of this is that the Fund for September 11th, which was a major charitable grant that was made in New York to many social service as well as arts organizations, was actually funded a lot of the Arab American artistic production during my fieldwork period. So in the context of urban renewal, artists are widely recognized as part of the process of gentrification, in which higher class residents drive out lower class ones. However, Richard Lloyd contends that artists are not only precursors to affluence, but contribute to the production of capital in the post-industrial city, as also suggested by Frederick Jameson's in Postmodernism, or the Cultural Logic of Late Capitalism. For example, between 1900 and 1970, the number of artists in America increased by only 44%. However, between 1970 and 1999, the number increased by 237%. The Center for Urban Futures estimates that in 2005, 8.3% of all creative sector workers in the United States were based in New York. And basically, the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs has a larger budget than the National Endowment for the Arts. And there have been estimates that in the 2005 $1 trillion economy of New York, the arts contributed about $25 billion. So this is obviously probably revised significantly downward since the recession, but that's okay. So basically, the following sections reveal the readiness of Generation X Arab American artists to capitalize on their familiarity with the city's cultural landscape and resources in order to promote their work and their vision of arts and culture. While the role of political ideology and activism in art is important, this paper is premised on the fact that most Arab American artists I interviewed upheld distinctions between art and politics prominent in America since the 1950s, emphasizing their independence and freedom as cultural producers instead of their commitment to any nationalistic ideologies or political parties. So these are the spaces that I went to. These are like 62 spaces, or 64. 2 of them you could say were Arab, or Arab-owned or Arab-run, and all the rest are not. So I went to over 100 events. 40% of them, though Arab-themed or including Arab actors or Arab artists or otherwise, were really produced by non-Arabs. As I said, there are 62 events in New York City. And I should also say that like 60% of the events that I studied were in English only. There was like not Arabic. So this kind of again speaks to that ever-present American audience. Like it would, be an Arab artist and in an Arab venue even, and it's like all in English. So, so these are very different kind of spaces. I'm going to go into what Alwan for the Arts is. Whitty Catering Hall is, I guess, what you would consider maybe more of a traditional community type of banquet hall forum that gets rented out for weddings and receptions and funerals probably, and occasionally occasionally teach-ins or demonstrations or things like that. But Alwan for the Arts is sort of more of this like new generation of artists, of art. So basically, while artists may live in the outer boroughs of Brooklyn or Queens or in the remote corners of Manhattan, venues selected for their performances and productions were all centrally located and often renowned showcases for arts and culture in Manhattan. Far from being restricted to ethnic ghettos, Arab American artists, performers, and cultural organizers, again, just chose to put them in the heart of kind of New York's cultural landscape. And I have like many examples of that, but 2 of them are just here, and they relate to the institutions I'm going to talk about next. This was the Gotham Comedy Club, which is a popular and well-regarded comedy club, and the Arab American Comedy Festival basically rented it out and put it here. And then the Alwan for the Arts would do film festivals, and this is one that took place, and it was put in the Tribeca film house, I guess you could call it, in Tribeca, which actually, interestingly, was founded by Robert De Niro, and the Tribeca Film Festival was started after 9/11 in a way to try to increase the life and culture of Lower Manhattan after the tragedy of 9/11 too. So in a way, it's kind of symbiotic, but basically, the Arab American culture producers basically rented mainstream venues in Manhattan and played upon the status of the particular spaces in order to promote the importance of their work and assure its success. Of course, this prestige comes at a price. Arab American artistic production rarely results in any kind of profits, barely covers their costs usually. Labor and talent are usually volunteered. And so the large part of the budgets of these arts and cultural organizations in New York are going to space. In fact, it's like most of it is going to space. This theater cost $20,000 for a week to rent, and you're selling tickets at like $10 a ticket. You're barely lucky to sell out a film or 2, in a week-long Arab festival. So like they're paying like a really big price for having this kind of like context, I suppose, for their work. And I don't say this to be critical. I mean, this was like really it was not even considered as like unusual. It was just like, this is what we do. But basically, despite the financial challenges, several institutions flourished during my fieldwork dedicated to Arab American arts, and I'm going to review 2 of them today. Comparing and contrasting, they have very different approaches to art, and to representing being Arab. And then I'm going to close with a review of an exhibit at a museum, at the Museum of Modern Arts. So one of them is called Alwan for the Arts. Alwan played a critical role in New York during my fieldwork period. They opened this loft. Really, it looks very nice here, but when it first opened, it was had wires hanging out of the ceilings, and the floors weren't unsanded, and there was plaster hanging off the walls. But like, people were so excited that there was an Arab space in Manhattan that they could do programming and events in, that they just poured in. No air conditioning, I mean, it's like a nightmare. I remember it very well. And so they really, and there was very broad support from a wide range of people, you know, everyone from elite professionals to Wall Street to housewives, shopkeepers, youth. It was very broadly accepted. Organizers hardly had to do any formal programming of events in their first year because so many groups and people volunteered to organize events for them. So there were visual art exhibits, concerts, book readings, plays, dances, film screenings, fundraisers for humanitarian relief. They were constantly booking the space, and organizers could kind of barely keep up. But over time, you know, Alwen went from a kind of renegade, haphazard sort of organization of volunteers to much more kind of market-savvy and coordinated group. And this kind of process was like kind of crash course in nonprofit arts management, really. But looking back, one might consider the disarray of the space at the time it opened to reflect the state of mind of the organizers when it came to how to develop the space and what it was meant to represent. After 9/11, the general tenor of self-promotion in the Arab community fell along the lines of, look, we're safe, peaceful, nonviolent Arabs who just want peace and to live in harmony with our neighbors. There was very little reception by the outside world, it seemed, for any other kind of rhetoric from Arabs. And Art for Change, Alwen was like a little more, just not so comfortable with just participating in that rhetoric. They kind of wanted to try to do something different. And, you know, generally though, they were kind of uncomfortable and rejected most conventional notions of who Arabs are and what Arab organizations are and what leadership was. And, you know, they felt politics were like hopelessly divisive and that hosting activities that were not explicitly political could maybe unite and possibly do something for people suffering in the Middle East, North Africa, or really possibly around the globe. I mean, it was just like very like big-minded kind of initiative. They struggled with their mission statement. You know, it ran something along the lines of, we're a nonprofit organization dedicated to the promotion of blank arts and culture in the United States, in New York, and whose arts and culture ranged from Arabs, Iranians, North Africans, South Asians, Afghanis, occasionally people of the Middle East. So they just were really kind of all over the place, but you know, they really wanted to fill the space, they wanted to keep the space, and you know, so I would kind of characterize the organizers as, you know, post-colonial in their outlook, resistant to American imperialism, aware of the dominant gaze on themselves as the other, and eager to promote high-quality art out of sort of modernist sensibilities. Then you have the Arab American Comedy Festival. So unlike the moral and intellectual ambivalence towards self-promotion and self-definition exhibited by Alwen, the Arab American Comedy Festival was eager to package itself and Arab identity in America in a popular and kind of palatable way. So you had, and many of you may know them, like Maysoun Zayed and Dean Obeidallah, their interest, you know, they really wanted to promote this. They started in 2003. They had sort of main goals. They were sort of brief, tangible, and could be repeated in sound bites without too much thought. You know, they said by showcasing Arab American performers, we want to get more media attention for the community as a whole and also encourage more Arab Americans to get involved in the arts. And they really did. I mean, they really were kind of a magnet for actors and filmmakers and theater people who decided they would try comedy. And they sort of an umbrella group for many other organizations, the National Association of Arab American Professionals, the Arab American Anti-Discrimination Committee, NABRAS, which was an Arab American theater collective at the time that's actually since been disbanded. So, so they really, and they were very clear on the Arab, like it wasn't something else, you know, it was just Arab, but in a pan-Arab, secular, you know, non-denominational kind of way, and they were very clear about that part. So they were kind of represented as sort of more popular, pastiche, kind of ahistorical look of Arabs. And rather than kind of resist American culture, they really aimed to relate to it through their sense of ethnic difference. Each year the festival grew, it earned more and more attention and publicity, sort of paid or unpaid, through their work, and they even had some spin-offs. You may have heard of them, the Axis of Evil comedy tour, which is promoted by Comedy Central. And really they're very interesting because they really took their work to the Arab world. Like their largest market went from like New York to like Ramallah, or not really, New York to like Amman, I think. And they have quite a reception there. So finally, I want to close with MoMA. So in the spring of 2006, MoMA held the exhibit Without Boundaries, 17 Ways of Looking. And this was meant to be a sort of an Islamic world extravaganza, or fandango, as someone put it. Basically, the description of the exhibit goes, at a time when Islamic world is the subject of extraordinary interest in the West, Without Boundary explores the work of a number of artists who come from that part of the world, but live elsewhere in cities ranging from Paris, New York, to Buenos Aires. So it was very anticipated, but like immediately criticized for being apolitical, including by the artists who were included in the exhibit at MoMA. So, you know, they were, the New York Observer, Tyler Green reported, you know, he said, MoMA keeps the walls clean, Islamic show sans politics, and he wrote, you know, Without Boundary often seems more like a product of RISD than Ramallah. RISD is the Rhode Island School of Design, and most of the artists are represented already by major galleries in Chelsea, and they're like very much established in the art world already before this happened. But what this really exhibited was sort of the tradition of MoMA, really, as a cultural institution, which is to say that MoMA has championed since World War II celebrating art as an expression of freedom and individuality. Basically, whereas in the World War II period, modern art was heralded as anti-communist and American abstract expressionism as an antidote to communist social realism, today's artists from the Muslim world are congratulated for their ability to triumph over their repressive and corrupt cultures in order to ascend toward individual recognition and success in the free West. So while several artists in the Without Boundary exhibit critiqued the sterilization of politics in the exhibit, or others wished that it had showcased artists from the actual Muslim world as opposed to the latest trendmakers in Chelsea, most missed the fact that Without Boundaries practiced the exact kind of politics that MoMA has historically practiced, that of declaring individual freedom through art. It's just, it's not the Cold War period anymore now, it's the War on Terror period, but we still have independent artists. So, you know, the Arab American artists who were selected to participate in this exhibit were at once honored and offended by this message, but there really wasn't much they could do about it once they were in the exhibit, except maybe critique it very carefully, because of course they were very honored to be in it. So none of this history, though, was made explicit in the conversation about the exhibit, but there was deep suspicion in the Arab American community about what it means for MoMA to promote an Islamic art show. So to conclude, though MoMA may require an artist to compromise on the political aspects of their artistic vision, being exhibited at MoMA epitomizes success for an artist. The exposure of Arab American artwork to mainstream audiences is considered a mechanism for changing negative American beliefs about Arabs and or Muslims into ones that are more positive or favorable. It is believed that that this could not only lead to the professional and material viability of these artists, which is desirable, but also improvement in the lives of Arabs in America and the Arab world. Success among Arab American artists is therefore negotiated by creating spaces that enable Arab Americans to articulate powerful artistic voices, by occupying spaces within mainstream venues that signify inclusion and success within America, and ultimately by being promoted by mainstream prominent artistic institutions as representatives not only of their ethnic identity, but also their identity as accomplished individual artists. So thank you very much.
Thank you.